Good evening and welcome to Slam the Gavel, the show that tells it all regarding family court, other court issues, as well as CPS. I'm your host, Maryann Petri, and since 2016, Monica Shimonek has been coaching moms and dads as they navigate through the treacherous waters of the family law racket. Aside from workshops, which helps with specific problems, her 12-week signature course, The Best Interest of the Parent, uses a 4-quadrant model to create a robust healing and empowerment system so that you control the narrative in your life, not the state. Use coupon code Slam the Gavel to get 10% off the course, and this will be included in the podcast notes. Now I've got my guest back on. His name is Bill Coleman. He was on episode 78, season 2. Now, we had discussed in the last episode the umbrella of parental alienation, first of 3 episodes. We have episode number 2 right now, which we will discuss family court and the genesis of parental alienation. How are you doing today, Bill?
I'm doing well, thanks, Maryann. Thank you for asking. How are you?
Okay, so we're back, and we're gonna do some more educating.
Yeah, and it'd be nice to think that it'll play a small part into solving, but at least it'll, it may help somebody who's going through, this dreadful parental alienation disease. So, Yep. So, would you like me to? I'll begin, if it's okay with you, just recapping a little bit.
Oh, that would be good. Sure.
Yeah. Last week we talked about the criminal side, and just as a recap, I did file for sole custody on a Monday morning, and that was really then when the family court sort of like took a back seat because the criminal court came into effect because of the events of that particular week. The stories, I wasn't living in the home, but I actually was, and the car breaking down, and the allegations of hostage. I mean, it's mind-numbing when I think about it to go back on. But again, it ends up in a criminal trial. I was completely sold out by my attorneys, but I am not sure whether any attorneys or lawyers would have made the difference. I believe it's in both sides of the Atlantic, it's a broken system simply because it's an adversarial system. You're relying on a jury that's probably heightened on emotion, and the bigger the emotion, for example, with things like murder or rape, would create that. And I'm not sure that they are the best people and best equipped to deal with it. So after a half-day trial, 2 weeks of jury deliberation, including, I think, one of the hang-ups where my ex-wife had said she did not go to work that day on 2 occasions under oath, and the time card was produced to show that she did. They still convicted me, and I think that's how high the emotion is, and they're just juries are looking to convict, not per se looking for the truth. And just on that point, there are a couple of things that I just want to mention. By law, prosecutors in both, everywhere really, are duty bound to lay the facts of the case before the court. They are not there to win cases. However, the reality is they try and win cases. And so you have that whole myth. So anyway, and then on appeal, people always say, well, you've got appeals. No, you don't. And I think the extremists that we find, and I almost don't like to say the word, but on the feminist side of things, will say that, people who have rape convictions or so on and so forth have these endless amounts of rape appeals, and they are meaningless because you never retry a case. There is no time when you have a case that's retried on appeal. It is simply errors of law. And if there are no errors of law, you will not get the case overturned. And I think I mentioned last week that there is still a case Um, that is used to this day from the United States Supreme Court, which, and I paraphrase, which says proof of innocence is not grounds to overturn a case and overturn a criminal conviction. So in other words, just because somebody is proven to be innocent, that's not grounds to overturn the case. It has to be an error of law. So, and that's true in the US, that's true in the UK. So again, the adversarial system does not work, and I would advise anybody who finds himself in a situation like I did not to put their hands in the face of a jury and to go with a 1 or 2, 3 judge trial. So obviously, during the time I was awaiting the criminal trial, which was important for us to lay down the ground, because that's the backdrop to the custody, the parental alienation, and everything else. But in between time, there was a family trial. And that family trial took place in Connecticut, but it was in the most contentious divorce court that there is. They centralized those kinds of cases. And the unfortunate part for parents who've been alienated is that you have to go on visitations, and the visitations last a certain period of time. And what the jury and what the judge says and what the system says is, whilst you're going through that period, you're actually losing contact with your children. So alienation is actually occurring. So even if you were able to disprove everything, absolutely everything, they would then say, well, look, a year's gone by and the children haven't been around this parent, so therefore we have to do this, this, and this. So by the time this, and this happens, that's another year. So now you're 2 years down the road, and you're obviously not the same parent that you were when they were ripped away from you, kind of thing.
Definitely.
So and we'll circle back to the actual process a little bit of the family trial, but that's where I think I want to bring into the conversation the genesis of parental alienation. From my research, it began with the Tender Years Doctrine. And the Tender Years Doctrine was introduced because, believe it or not, back in the day, and we're talking 100 maybe or more years ago, it was men who were getting custody of children. And the reason for this is, and you have to think middle class here, you can't think about your lower social, nobody was getting divorced pretty much at the lower social levels. They just were not. You were sort of in it for life, I think, at that point, or you faced it. But I think it was the middle classes that essentially were potentially getting divorced. Well, the thought was, mom had stayed at home, mom wasn't at work, mom wasn't employed. It wasn't at a time in history where, and it was pre-war for the most part, where women had jobs. So there wasn't a need for that second income as there is today to pay the mortgage, and two people are in that kind of situation. So how would you give how would you give children to a mother who has no means to support those children? So I think what was happening was the fathers were getting the children, and they were perhaps hiring nannies, or they were, family members, or whatever the case may be, because they had an income coming in. So once that got reviewed, and I think the intention, you would have to say, would be a good and honest one. That would be, well, let's keep mom in the picture, or mum as it's known here in the UK. Let's keep the mother in the picture, of course. Mother gets the residential custody. Father sees the children whenever he can and whenever he wants at all times. There's no restrictions. And all the father has to do, because he has the job, would be paying for the family in the normal way as if the family was intact. So you would think that was reasonable. But unfortunately, we're dealing with human beings.
Right.
And human beings aren't reasonable. And all of a sudden, you're going to get into things like, well, if you don't pay, you don't see the children. Mm-hmm. So that's what became of that. Very quickly, it deteriorated into, well, yes, this is what we'll do. Everybody's happy. Everybody sees the children. Oh, you can't pay, or you won't pay, or this or this or that or whatever. Whatever the reasons are why the money became an issue. Perhaps it was somebody who changed the job and got fired, and maybe it was this. It's we can't go back throughout time and analyze every case, but for whatever reason. It became, you don't pay, you don't see the children. There began parental alienation. And for the largest part and for the largest time, it was a thing directly associated with fathers. There were no alienated mothers at that time under these sorts of extent. I mean, there could be one random situation for some random reason, but there was no alienation for mothers at that time, and that's how parental alienation began. Now, over time, I think it's morphed into a situation where whether it's fathers who have become a little more proactive in that department, or savvy, or whatever the case may be. And I also think there's been a bigger increase in single mothers who are having children, without a partner involved to begin with. So then you get the alienation that comes from the state. Mm-hmm. So they will make up a particular set of circumstances to say the mother's not fit in some capacity. So whether it's the father, and they are, by the way, the kinds of allegations that are made against mothers and against fathers are two different ones. I think I'm the poster child for, he sexually assaulted me, he physically assaulted me, he raped me, he this, he that. With mothers, it tends to be more to do with things like, she's on drugs, she's an alcoholic, she's never home and she's off with different guys every night, or she puts the kids in danger, or she's psychologically disturbed, or this or that. And maybe some of those things are also being said by the state and child protective services or whatever. And mothers are alienated in that way. So with all of that in mind, you get this beast that has taken on a life of its own. And you would then say, well, how does reasonable-minded people allow this to happen? Well, when I think it was Garner, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, please, Maryann. I think it was a gentleman by the name of Garner who.
Richard Gardner, yeah.
Richard Gardner, yeah, who identified parental alienation as an actual disease or mental disorder, and actually, I think it's now in the DSM books. It's DSM-5, if I'm not mistaken. So it is categorized as that. So
you know what I think? I don't want to interrupt, but I think it was taken out. I think it was taken out of the DSM. I heard
it could have been. Yeah, it was put in. It wasn't in the DSM-4. I heard it was going in the DSM-5. I believed it did go in the DSM-5. Now, if there's a DSM-6, then it may have been withdrawn from that. I'm not exactly sure, but I think there's a lot of clinicians that will still refer to it that way. Right. maybe it's the Pluto of our solar system. It's been taken out as one of our planets and may get introduced again. I'm not sure. But, you know, it really should be in the DSM, because I think it is something that children do experience. And in that sense, it is a mental health issue. So I wouldn't understand why it would get withdrawn. But again, the bigger picture, it's a beast. And why wouldn't reasonable-minded people not interject and stop this from happening? Well, sadly to say, and for the want of a better reason, and I really can't come up with one, we have to go back to that old chestnut of money. If you were to take that leverage, that power, that emotion out of a divorce, what need would there be for family court attorneys? What need would there be for judges, court officials? Just like in the criminal aspect, you know, if you were to introduce polygraphs and scientific MRIs about who's telling lies and who's telling the truth, then, you know, all of a sudden you don't need those court officials either. So there are things at play as to why, you know, reasonable-minded people can't interject or have no luck in interjecting. And one of the things I sadly say is that the only way I see parental alienation stopping is by there being more mothers who are parentally alienated. And that sounds horrible and weird to say, but with the ratios right now about 80-20, it could be 75-25, I'm not sure, of fathers alienated over mothers. But we all as a society are, you know, as men are like that, in protection of who we feel are more vulnerable or weaker in certain ways. And whilst it's still such a small percentage, I don't know whether those women who are suffering like, you know, any father would, or you know, like anyone would in parental alienation, I don't know if that's enough to bring it into the social conscience of society for them to change. In other words, I could put it this way: if it was 60%, 40% mothers who were alienated than fathers, I think there would be movement towards it already. But I sadly believe, because there is not that many compared to men, I think that's the reason that's not in the social mindset. I've often said the only way parental alienation will ever be defeated is with mothers, is with women taking the lead, whether it's they're only 5%, 10%, 20%, or 50%. I believe it's only women that can defeat it. I really do. You know, because mothers are mothers of sons, and they may be mothers of sons who've had children, whether it be, again, it could be their own children directly, or their children are suffering because they're now parents and suffering through parental alienation, be it a mother or a father. So it's when you have a member of your family that you love, whether it's your own child, that you're alienated from as a mother, or whether it's a brother or an uncle or someone like that, that you see that, you know, that pain. And again, those are the kinds of women that I want to keep encouraging to get involved. And I'm often asked by women, can you give me some advice? What should I do? Who can I join? And I tell them, join a fathers group. Though, you know, 99.9% of them, to my knowledge, welcome women into their groups, and they want women in their groups. They want mothers in their groups. and they want them to take active roles. In this regard, I don't think men are the leaders that they tend to be in other areas of life. I really don't.
Mm-hmm.
I think that they fall very short in this area.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, and to me, it seems as though that women would play a much better leadership role in that regard. But one of the things that those mothers and women would have to come to grips with is the fact that this disease, parental alienation, is predominantly there because of laws that are geared not to be in favor of fathers and men. And as long as they can accept that and say, oh, okay, that's the genesis of it, but now it's affecting everybody. So now I know where it started. So we need to eradicate it. And I think knowledge is power, and what I would hope is that unity can come together, and fathers would be able to then go, you know what, we need to get in behind and give support, because we're not going to be able to do this ourselves. So I mean, there's a lot more to the Tender Years Doctrine and
Mm-hmm.
the many decades that ensued, for how it's gotten to the state that it has. But it is affecting so many parents. It is affecting so many children. Changes are slow, and it just simply doesn't need to exist the way it does. And I can tell every parent that if you blink, 20 years have gone by and your children are grown. And then what? And that's the situation that I'm in. And the only reason I'm continuing to go on is because, one, I want to clear my name for my children, but I know that this is something that will affect parents and children into the future. So in a nutshell, that's the genesis piece. And I'm happy to field questions if any have arisen for you, Maryann, on that regard.
Oh, definitely. And, if people are wondering about the Tender Years Doctrine, and just to let people know that I did interview Michael Sayen on December 23rd, 2020. He is season 1, episode 22, and he is like a walking history book. And he
Oh,
explains
good.
the Tender Years Doctrine and how that
Yes.
evolved. Because I've had on my show several times, and I think he mentioned it on that one, but he's been on the show several times. But yeah, it's like this whole parental alienation is all evolving around money. It's all about
Yes.
money.
So I was hitting. So would it be fair to say that in my layperson's terms, as opposed to an esteemed guest such as he, but then I was touching bases of what he was saying. Well,
Definitely.
I mean, that's good to hear, because I try to research as best as I can and do the layperson version. So
Mhm,
I would
mhm.
defer to him all day long. So that's good to know. And I'm glad he was able to clarify some of that.
Oh, yes. He also talks about the history of Great Britain and how it's kind of infiltrated into the United States law.
Yes, yes. I think that's very true. Unfortunately, when anything is watered down, it's worse. So
Mhm.
I would say the system here is better, family and criminal. I don't think I've been told by a police officer that what happened to me in the US, actually, when I first arrived back, said that would never have happened here. She'd be in jail.
Mhm.
And I would like to think that's true. However, I hear enough and see enough to know, whether it's here in the UK, horror stories from Australia, horror stories from New Zealand,
Mhm.
horror stories from Germany. I mean, it really does happen everywhere. Some of these stories are amazing. But, I think when the US system is very much based on the UK system, but if you water that down, it's got to be worse, and it is worse. There's no question it's worse, but that's not a testament to say what's happening here in the UK is good. I hear enough from certain police chiefs in certain areas saying certain things, and CPS, the nonsense I hear from the Crown Prosecution Service to do with, not prosecuting certain cases and things like that. I mean, it's absolute, without equivocation, nonsense. And there's numerous times where I've actually felt compelled to reach out to, whether it's and I don't want to get into specifics, but whatever that is, whether it's CPS or somebody in a particular type of group or whatever. And I've reached out and said, look, I'm happy to debate you on air, and you can spend an hour, and I'll need, about 3 or 4 sentences in 5 minutes. And because it's absolute nonsense. It's worse in the US because it's pretty much known that if you're arrested there, that's your conviction. You're not sidestepping an arrest. That just can't happen. There's never a case where, when I say never, 99% of the time, of course, there's some case somewhere, but there's they will try and plead you down to some misdemeanor, so that you can't sue. I think it's $3,000. Well, it was $3,300 a day or something, plus punitive damages if you take it into a civil court. So there's a no back down from the arrest, and I think I hear more of the story here that this is how ludicrous it is. They say that if a woman here would make a phone call, whether it's in a domestic or not, but if let's say it's a domestic, and said that she'd been physically or sexually assaulted, what they're expecting us to believe, and I know police officers here, those police officers would show up and do nothing. I don't even know where to begin with that. It is so ridiculous. If they get a phone call and they arrive, they are arresting you. There is no ands, ifs, or buts. I mean, one little minute look that something has taken place, you are not going to be able to stay in that same place as the person you supposedly assaulted. It's just not going to happen. So again, this all goes back to how a story can be manipulated for the gain of getting custody of children, and which then ignites the parental alienation syndrome. And we've like when you've got a sore tooth, a toothache, we all know you don't take what you can see off. You've got the dentist gets in and gets the root out. That's because that's what's causing the pain. So you've got to get to the root of these things. There are so many barriers up. In my case, because it was a sexual assault, rape situation, you can't victimize the victim. Well, I would beg to argue that I'm the victim.
Right,
so
right.
I mean, I don't understand why the questioning of circumstances would be victimizing someone. I would think that anybody who's been physically or sexually assaulted has a responsibility to come forward to give the cast iron story, because you do not want a horrible, hideous human being like that able to walk the streets and do it again. So you can't negate your civic duty. So, but it's not in the best interests of the people who are making the money to see it that way. It's in their interests to say, we don't victimize the victim. And that's absolute nonsense. Absolute nonsense. And there are ways to appropriately do it. I mean, for example, if you've got somebody with so many lacerations, so many bruises, so many this, you're literally peeling them up off the floor, I don't think you need too much more to know something really bad happened.
Right,
So
right.
what you need to go into with that particular victim would be far less. However, if you've got somebody that look like me or you currently, and they're saying, oh, I just got blah, blah, blah. Well, at that point, you would have to say, well, if you went through all of that and you're visually not seeing something, then surely you should be entitled to question that person further. I think that would only be reasonable.
Right.
And, as I pointed out in the previous podcast that I would direct your listeners to, that timeline, which I gave, probably only about 50 or 60% of what transpired to show I was innocent in that week. I mean, it was crazy stuff. It really was. In fact, if you don't mind, would it be okay, Maryann? Your listeners can go back to all that. But one thing I just want to show as a manipulation of something from that week. On that Friday morning that I was arrested, her car was ready to go on the Thursday. And I actually went out to the car with the kids to take them to school. And she was sitting in my car. And when I opened the car door, I said, oh, hi, what you doing? I said, oh, you're not going in your car, whatever, just pleasant conversation. She said, no, I just dropped me off on the way, sort of thing. I went, oh, okay. And I made a joke with the kids. Oh, we'll take mommy to work and we'll do this. And then me and you will come back and because the youngest one wasn't doing daycare that day. So everything, we made like a funny joke and whatever. Well, she needed to do that because what she was trying to do was say that I wasn't letting her use her car. But yeah, I proved in the family court that the car was not operational until I got the final thing for it on the Thursday morning. I think it was. I think it was the Thursday morning, because the initial part I got for it, which was also a battery, on that particular car, the poles were wrong. So there was a return, and I had the slip, and then a repurchase, I had the slip. There was another item that I had to get, and so it was fully ready to go on the Thursday, so that on the Friday she could have taken it to work. And she was already in my car, which I knew nothing about. Well, now I know why, is because she'd already arranged that was when I was getting arrested. So again, when you set out for that when you have those tools in your bag and the system is geared for that, the manipulation becomes very, easy. And that's the kind of thing that will lead into a long-term parental alienation, as it has been in my case. So yeah, I mean, again, for your listeners, I would direct them in the Tender Years Doctrine if they want to know the genesis, and it is the way forward and how we can all come together and find a way of eliminating the disease of parental alienation. Now, I know we. I'm not sure how we're doing for time, but the process is. Do you want me to go over a little bit, Maryann, the actual court process a little bit for family court?
Have time. We definitely have time. Definitely.
Yeah. So with the family court, you go through a series. I had a lady called. Well, I'll refer to her as Sylvia, and I'll say her last name, and she did the investigation, and by the end of it, she made it perfectly clear who she believed. And what you do, you go through visitations, you go through this evaluation by a court-appointed family court clinician, and all of you then have a guardian ad litem, which in America, I think, in the US now, is really being frowned upon. I think I'm not sure if they're doing away with guardian ad license,
Yeah, I wish they
GALs.
would.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so again, they're supposed to do their thing, and from all of that, in my case, the judge in their memorandum of decision referred to me as the emotional parent and the superior parent. And that actually was stated in the memorandum of decision. Essentially, Maryann, I was the one who fed them. I was the one who bathed them. I was the one who played with them. I remember numerous occasions where the boys would gravitate to me, and my ex would, bend their bottom lip because they would move towards me. And so I was that kind of, hugger, touchy feely kind of parent. And in fact, our friends at the time, when the story got out, not the bad stuff story, when we first had the children, the story was that I used to breastfeed our children. And
yeah.
well, the thing with it is, and to be fair to my ex-wife, I did promote this story. I actually promoted it. I wanted to be as involved as possible. And what I would do, I would prop her up on the bed so that she would just be in like a sitting position in the bed with certain cushions that we'd bought and pillows that we bought. And I would pin her nightie to which one she started and finished with. But I encouraged her to sleep. So I said, "You not off to sleep. You just sleep." And she could sleep through anything. She really could.
I wish I could.
So yeah, no, she was very good. Her eyes would close and she would go sleep. She never had a worry in her life. The moment she closed her eyes, she was asleep. I would do all of that and change, to the other side, or start with the other side, and so on and so forth. Do all the nappy changing, put the baby back, and that was it. Because that to me made me feel as though I was playing my part in that. So I think that's why I got the all of that came out in the family trial. And my family trial, and I have to say this to your listeners, you're not going to be as lucky in your family trial as I was in mine, because it was that contentious. Normally the judge said, it's a 3-day trial. My trial in a family court lasted 2 weeks. And by the middle of the second week, Judge Linda Monroe said, "I believe you. This is going to take 2 weeks." And to be fair, I really did get 95% of everything to do with my case out. And I for that, I'm very grateful. Unfortunately, within the family trial, she had five times I was trying to interject for a perjury claim, for there to be a bench arrest, and 5 times before I could get my words out, I was shot down. And I think if your listeners go back to last week's podcast, the one I quoted was the police officer who wrote his report saying there wasn't any problem. And that's it. Yeah, on the stand, under oath, in the family trial, my wife said, "I told the police officer I feared for my life and I wanted him out the house."
Right.
So, that's perjury. And if that arrest had been made, there would never have been a criminal trial. So in that regard, Judge Linda Monroe let me down badly. So for all the good that she did, and for all the positiveness in the memorandum of decision, it all meant nothing, because I went to a criminal court where I was sold out by 2 attorneys who are now disbarred, and I went to prison for 11 years. Sadly, because of the criminal trial, she awarded everything to my ex. So now you get into the family trial where it rewards the bad parent, where it rewards the parent who alienates. There's never a time a parent who alienates is doing anything in the best interests of a child, and that's what is supposed to underpin everything in the family trial. What is in the best interests of the child?
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, whilst the voice of lies and manipulation are given such a loud stage and a loud volume, that's just really never going to be the case. So, but in terms of the family trial, regardless of whether it works or not, and sadly it didn't in my case, always, always, always do your family trial prior to the criminal trial, in the hope that you can get the criminal trial to take judicial notice of the family trial. Because you can get more out in the family trial, because the criminal trial is very narrow. In a family trial, it's very broad, and you can get more out into into court, and hopefully for it to be heard. So, in a nutshell, and I am trying to nutshell a lot of this stuff, Maryann. That would be, and again, this all took place over 3 years, so it was a very long time to wait for a criminal trial, and to wait for the family trial, and to be alienated from your children, and then you end up getting convicted, and and then you've got to somehow regroup. It's either suicide or regroup. You've got to find a way, and thankfully I found a way. The suicide option was always there. It was always first and foremost in my head. You could never escape that, and I really have difficulty with that to this day. And I've had a suicide attempt since I've been here, since I've been back. Or episode. I'd rather call it an episode than an attempt. So it doesn't leave you, but if you can regroup and you can find another way, and the way I did it was just to think about my children, the greater good, and just making sure that this doesn't happen to anyone ever again. And that's where that goes. What we'll talk about in our third podcast, which is the human rights thing, in my protest, and what I decided to do, and continue the fight on the inside.
Definitely. That is going to be a really hot topic on episode 3 of that podcast.
Yeah.
That is really what you went through should never have happened to begin with.
Agreed. And I think there is if people were doing their due diligence, it would have happened. All of a sudden I had a very bolshy police officer who arrested me, and who I thought initially was okay as a detective, a female detective, then turned around like she was being not nice or something. And then both of them in the family court essentially saying, my job was to take his statement and nothing else. So all of a sudden it was passing the buck. So I think they both realized they'd been conned. They were in a bad spot. So what they were essentially saying was, hey, my job was to take his statement, nothing else. So the cop said, my job was to take his statement, give it to the detective. The detective said, all my job was to take his statement. That's all I did. And I gave it to the prosecutors. That's it. So everybody got out of it by saying that. Well, how about you investigate? How about you ask, well, you said he only moved into the premises that weekend. How come he's been there for 3 months? You said you couldn't use the car, but the car was out of commission. There was other things. Believe me, I have an alibi, and I don't want to get into that on this particular podcast, but it definitely is out there. It would take a whole lot of explaining. But there is an alibi. Trust me, there's an alibi. And I do have an alibi. And there are other things that were contained within that week that clearly shows that it never happened. let alone the fact that she told the family court counselor lady, virtually every day of the week. Apparently, the first time it was the Sunday, and then it was the it could have been the Wednesday. Then it went to a Tuesday, and how many other days there were? And then the last representation was a Friday morning. And there was actually a very funny exchange between myself and the judge during the questioning of someone. We actually went over to one of her work friends' pool, who has a swimming pool in the back garden. And it was just her friend, the two kids, my ex-wife and myself. And I began to question this friend about bruises. Now, there's never been a mark on Jill, not ever. Apparently, her elderly boss, who again, for legal reasons, I'm not sure if I can or cannot say the name, but I won't just in case. But one day I hope to expose them, who completely backed her. Her boss said to the family court relations lady that there were always bruises all over her. Now, I can prove that as not being true because of an alibi. So there's that, and actually can prove that through 3 alibis as that. But here was an opportunity of somebody who saw my ex-wife in a bikini. So I began to ask sort of that question. At first, Judge Linda Monroe thought, why the hell is he asking these questions? So she was kind of, her attorney was a woman who was absolutely, and even the family court relations lady said she was hideous, just a person. And she was trying to object all over the place. But then the penny dropped with the judge. And you can read it in the court transcripts. It always makes me laugh when I read it. She goes, oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Coleman. I see. Oh, I'm sorry. I see where you're going with this. And she sort of like looked round to her left and took a position and was all kind of friendly then with the witness. And she said, let me ask you these questions. And she was really into it. Did you ever see blah, blah, blah? Did you ever see blah, blah, blah? Did you ever see blah, blah, blah? Oh, no. Oh, no. No, no, no. Oh, no. So in the memorandum of decision, she says that the plaintiff claims that there was physical marks and bruises, this, that, and the other. After hearing the evidence, this court finds there were never any bruises on. Now, think about that. The top judge in the state says this, but yet now the prosecutors read it. How do you prosecute someone when you've read such a thing coming from the top judge and you know that it never happened, yet you're about to prosecute the person who she said was doing these things? You cannot make it up. It's laughable if it wasn't so sad and it didn't happen to me, kind of thing. It's just a joke. And every single thing that was ever said, I was able to find the evidence to refute it.
Right.
And again, that's in the family court what you are able to do, because it's not as narrow as the criminal court, which is very narrow, unfortunately. So yeah, so that's the bit on again, and I'm hoping I'm making the link, and this is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to make the link between the family court, the criminal court, its genesis, and how that's all muddled in. Because I also, what we hope to talk to in our final podcast, and our third podcast, is what are the possible steps forward? What are the possible solutions? And as well as that's something I decided to do. So hopefully merging all of that will help.
Definitely. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
I think one of the things I think I do want to add, and I don't know if it's off topic, but I think it's certainly something for our
it's something for mothers and women, I think, to just think about for a moment, because of the world that we currently live in. We're all as parents trying to find.
That's going to be even more difficult to do when we're living in what everybody now terms a Me Too world. And a Me Too world also comes, and there's another popular thing out there called toxic masculinity. And I find a lot of women say, well, is chivalry dead? And where have all the good guys gone? And, and there's this thing called MGTOW, men going their own way. And I'm not a MGTOW person, but I certainly understand why they're too afraid to interact the way we used to. And most of the people I follow on Twitter are women. Dr. Christina Hoff Sommers, for example. I mean, there's just a list of wonderful which is what I am, an egalitarian women who will not stand up for the nonsense. When you've got that Australian person who I will not name because I won't give her credit for it, who starts a Twitter thing called Kill All Men.
Oh my goodness.
That was a big thing. She never got banned. Not for that. But yeah, I won't mention it. It sounds a bit like Harry Potter, where you can't mention Voldemort's name.
Right. Oh,
I won't mention her name because I won't give her credit for that. But she started the Twitter campaign "Kill All Men." But that's not a new thing with that breed of feminist is the only way to say it. But one of the things I do want to put out there for women is that when guys or people, men and women, but guys flirt and are trying to seduce you, it's not grooming. And we're getting into this toxic masculinity thing where every time a guy does something, it's grooming, and we need to make that connection with the world that we're living in. And we shouldn't be surprised that we have laws that support parental alienation when that kind of thing is going on. I think everybody needs to understand the whole environment is making things the way they are. But us trying to change parental alienation is not going to change while a guy doing what a guy does since the caveman days.
Right.
And women doing what they do since the caveman days. Flirting and seduction is not grooming. Who's worse, the 75-year-old aging rock star who's never been attractive in his life anyway, hooking up with a young girl who's in her 20s or 30s? Or is it the young girl in her 20s or 30s who's trying to milk the 75-year-old aging rock star for his money or his power, whatever? I mean, who cares? Who cares? If they both bring something to their relationship, it's fine. And it happens the other way around. We have whole websites to do with cougars. Who cares? Who cares? If you're consenting adults, you're flirting and it's seduction, it's not grooming. And unfortunately, when we're talking about parental alienation, we have a current society out there that is geared to think in a certain way. And that's what I fear about tackling this subject of parental alienation, is that what is the environment like out there to be able to change these laws? And if these laws are based on certain things, that's why I just believe that only women can do this. Women and mothers and grandmothers, these are to me, they have to be front and center. They have to be the leadership. As men, we have to get in behind them, and we have to say, look, we've tried and failed. You
Mhm.
know, you may be in the smaller quota of alienated parents, but you are the most powerful of alienated parents.
Mhm.
And we need all of us to change this. But we have to recognize the world that we're living in. You know, on the one hand, we can't have, and again, I'll go back to, you know, flirting and seduction being used as grooming, and then on the flip side, you know, women are saying, "Where have all the good guys gone?
Right.
You know, why aren't
Right.
they talking to us anymore? You know,
Mhm.
why can't you?" Well, there's a fear factor out there,
Mhm.
and that's a
Mhm.
very toxic thing. So
Mhm.
how can we think that we're going to change parental alienation, which essentially got, you know, was based on taking payment from fathers to support children, that has been so hideously disfigured and not now serving the intent that it might have been innocently thought about. Oh, well, this makes sense.
Mhm.
Mum's here, dad can pay, everybody sees children, we're
Mhm.
all happy campers. You know,
Right.
it
Right.
makes sense, right? No, but you've got people trying to make money from that.
Right.
And now it's going to be used as a tool, as a weapon, as a whatever. And what's sad for mothers and women, it's now began to affect them. It's now including women in alienation. And so I know it's, I don't know if any of that's making sense,
Oh,
Maryann, or it
yeah.
would make sense to your
It applies to
viewers.
me.
Yeah, exactly. But it all, you know, if you want, oh God, I almost, I'm not, I like analogies. And I draw a lot of analogies from, maybe it's my age, I'm not sure, from World War II, the
Mhm.
Nazi Party and Hitler. Um, and I draw a lot of comparisons to that.
Mhm.
The good people of Germany weren't killers and murderers. They were sold lies and a doctrine and to hate the Jews. And that's the reason why a lot of that support was gained by Hitler and those things happened.
Mhm.
We need to see the indoctrination of what's happening in society to understand how we are going to best tackle what we're involved in, which is parental alienation. So if society has been indoctrinated with a certain hatred of a particular group of people, and that is now long standing, you know, everybody who's trying to seduce you is a groomer. Everybody who's trying to flirt is a groomer, you know, all those kinds of things. If we're involved in that kind of society and they've been indoctrinated with that, and that will, you know, lead to that kind of hate, how are we going to you know, tackle parental alienation, which is rooted and based in some of these laws? I taught anger management for a living, and every form of hate starts with an unknown. If you have an unknown in your life, that goes up a ladder, that moves forward, and as it moves forward, it turns into various forms of anger, and then
Mhm.
from anger it can only get to hate. So
Mhm.
there's a pathway for an unknown. Well, how do you stop that anger and hate from happening? You expose the unknown, you make the unknown known, and that's where I try and round all these things in together. We're in a very difficult time in society. Not the pandemic has not made that any easier, obviously.
Right. Definitely.
Um, but you know, we're in a difficult time in society. Wars are being pitted between men and women,
Mhm.
and I think that will filter down into the courts, into the criminal courts. It's easy to say, oh yeah, you know, she's a drug addict and she's, you know, an alcoholic and she's not a fit mother. And it's easy to say, yeah, he sexually assaulted me and physically beat me and this, that, and the other. And there's no evidence for any of it. And we've got to get away from all of that,
Mhm.
because the answers are very simple, but the people who are interested parties do not want it to be simple.
Mhm.
So if there's a message I can leave you with on this particular subject, besides the genesis of PAS and the family court, is that mothers and women out there, please, come together. Without you, we cannot win this. And I would just implore every mother, and you've interviewed women on this subject as well, and there's your good self, and it's going to take more of that. And I just hope if that happens, we stand a chance of eliminating parental alienation forever.
Well said. Well said. Okay. Slam the Gavel is a podcast to help the public understand what really goes on in the family courtrooms that in turn perpetuate parental alienation. I'm your host, Maryann Petri, author of Dismantling Family Court Corruption, Why Taking the Kids Was Not Enough, and Cry Out for Justice, Poems of Truth. Please join us again with episode 3 with Bill Coleman, where we talk about the human rights and his torture. So join us, and we will talk soon, Bill.
Maryann, thank you.
Definitely.
Take care.
You too.